Welcome back to TruthCurrents. The holidays are past, it's 2025, and it's time for us to look forward. A new year usually brings out resolutions because we've decided there are things in our lives we want to make better, because we're chasing a kind of nebulous idea. I want to be happy. Well, we now have scientific research that tells us the secret recipe for being happy. The main selling point of modern secular society is that you should throw off all moral restraint. You should have unlimited, unfettered freedom to do anything you desire, to be anything you want to be, and they've told us that then we'll be happy. We've been hearing that lesson, frankly, for generations. Pop music gives us that lesson, television and movies, and today, social media is all about living the dream life, making yourself happy by doing whatever it is you want to do. And honestly, the United States population has bought into the message. A quarter of Americans over the age of 40, the highest percentage ever recorded, have never been married. As Generation Z ages into maturity, the share of unmarried Americans could climb to as high as a third of the total population. Not only are we becoming less committed to each other, we're becoming less religious as a people. Now, you might think that would be a problem, but we keep being told that throwing off those restraints, releasing ourselves from those external obligations, will allow us to be what we always dreamed we wanted to be. Zoomers are the least likely to identify as Christian of any generation right now, and they tend to value time for themselves over having children. In fact, the majority of that generation says that they're at least willing to consider non-monogamy. Now, that's just a code word that means a sexual revolution without restraint. By now, because of generations of this kind of teaching, we should be the happiest, freest, most self-actualized people in history, right? Turns out, the reality is quite the opposite. A Gallup poll just in the last few months found that only 41% of those between the ages of 18 and 26 described themselves as thriving. Millennials, the generation before that, at the same stage of life, 60% of them of that generation said that they were thriving. So that self-awareness that I'm doing well, that I'm happy, is in decline. 1 in 3 in our country today say that they are suffering symptoms of depression and anxiety. Turns out pursuing pleasure and self-gratification above everything else, we were told that's the secret to happiness. Actually, what we've discovered is that's the recipe for a lack of pleasure, an absence of gratification, and a corresponding disappearance of actual happiness. Now, let's contrast the empty promises of a kind of secular hedonism with the new research that is coming out by actual scientific and statistical studies that tell us that the lives of devotedly religious people who are married tend to be at the highest levels of self-identification for happiness. Brad Wilcox has written a new book. He's a sociologist from Virginia. He's written a new book entitled Get Married. But I love the subtitle, Get Married: Why Americans Must Defy the Elites, Forge Strong Families, and Save Civilization. It turns out that contrary to a generation of jokes on sitcoms and stand-up comedians about marriage, turns out scientific research proves that God-centered marriage is not where intimacy goes to die. Statistically speaking, we find out that monogamous, religiously devoted, church-attending couples have the highest satisfaction in their sex lives, and against all odds, they have the highest frequency of physical intimacy of anyone in the population. In fact, this generation that's not getting married because they've been told that they should be free to pursue anything they want, they're telling us in actual scientific studies that they're having sex less and less and less, to the point that they have become involuntarily celibate in many cases. Well, this scientific research that I reference, both in Brad Wilcox's book and in some recent studies for the Institute for Family Studies, tell us that the fewer sexual partners you have before your wedding, the happier and more divorce-proof your marriage is likely to be, as well as the fact that it tends to be more fulfilling, thereby producing higher levels of, you got it, happiness. The good life, it turns out, is not the result of throwing off moral restraint and all religious belief, but it's the very opposite. Those who voluntarily submit themselves to these ideals, the ideals that have traditionally been esteemed throughout Western civilization, those things that we've thrown overboard because we thought they were outdated and irrelevant, turns out happiness comes not to those who single-mindedly chase their appetites, but happiness is reserved for those who master their appetites and live under the voluntary obligation of the things that have actually made Western civilization so strong and stable. Well, what does that mean for us in 2025? You say, well, I'm already married, or I know who I'm going to marry. How does this play out? Well, the new year is a time when we stop and tend to take stock of who we are and where our life is. That's why we talk about New Year's resolutions. Resolutions are simply an acknowledgement that there's something in my life that I recognize that needs to be changed, and I'm going to set my mind to making those changes. Why? Because resolutions are a desire to tinker with the flow of our life so that in the coming year we'll be more satisfied, we'll be more productive, we'll be happier than we were in the past. Well, how does God play into all that? Well, in the Old Testament, there's a prophet named Isaiah who delivered a message from God to the nation of Israel. He was speaking about Israel and a new day that was coming. And in Isaiah chapter 43, beginning in verse 18, God says this, speaking to his people, he says, "Do not call to mind the former things or consider things of the past. Behold, I am going to do something new. Now it will spring up. Will you not be aware of it? I will even make a roadway in the wilderness and rivers in the desert." Here's the thing. The impulse to make New Year's resolutions comes from the fact that there is, as we inventory ourselves, in some areas we identify a dissatisfaction with who we are. And we want to be something different. We want to be more productive. We want to be more content, happier. Well, it turns out that God has those same desires for his people. He wants us to be more satisfied, more content. He wants us to have not just surface level happiness, but a kind of deep and abiding joy that makes living life something that we look forward to, not something that we dread every day when we have to roll out of bed. God says, I have something for you. So don't live in your past. Don't let the devil weigh you down with guilt and regret and shame and those things. Let the past be the past. I have something new for you. And I want you to follow me. I want you to seek me because I'm going to do something new in your life. I'm going to actually carve out a road in the wilderness. A wilderness is a wild place where travel is difficult. And so the image of God actually making a road, he's saying, I'm going to make the passage through your life better for you, easier to traverse. I'm not only going to make a road through the wilderness, but I'm going to put rivers in the desert. I'm going to provide what you need to have the life that I mean for you to have. You see, we've been taught by the secular society that God is the stealer of joy, that he hates fun, that he is about restricting us and telling us all the things we can't do. The Bible, they say, is filled with thou shalt nots. And yet that is a misrepresentation of the nature of God. He's a good father who who wants to give to his children good things. He wants you to have the life that he created you to have. And so, what scientific research, actual double-blind statistical studies is actually beginning to identify is that those who chase after God are the ones that are finding the life that the secular world has been promising and never delivering. In other words, our popular culture today overpromises and underdelivers, as opposed to God, who promises and delivers exactly what he said. Now here's the sad part of this passage in Isaiah. Here's God speaking through the prophet, and he's saying, I have so much. I don't want you to live in the shame and the regret of your past. I've got a new day for you. I'm going to make a road in the wilderness. I'm going to put rivers in your desert. I want your life to be all that I've designed you, that I've created you, that I've gifted you to be. But then there's this verse, just 2 verses down in that chapter. God says, amazingly, yet you have not called on me. Instead, you've become weary of me. See, when we buy the lie of our culture about happiness, we leave God out of the equation. God says, I have a great life for you. I have exactly what you're hardwired to need. And yet, it's right here for the taking. But you don't look for me. You don't come find me. You don't put yourself in a position to receive all that I want to give. At the bottom line, here's my suggestion. You should take that list of New Year's resolutions, some of which may already have gone by the wayside. Take that list of New Year's resolutions, roll them up into one resolution for the next year. And let this be the driving force to seek God first and his kingdom, with the promise of Matthew 6:33 that when we do that, these other things that will make us happy will be added to us. Listen, you shouldn't go to church or get married just because the statistics say it will make you happy. But surveying the data that's coming out on marriage and faith, it's clear that those who pursue intrinsically valuable goals often find deep fulfillment along the way, while those who shrug off those goals, who live for themselves, who give unfettered release to their appetites, turns out self-indulgence typically fails to produce what it promises. There's no gratification, there's no pleasure, there's ultimately no joy or happiness. This year, in 2025, there are a lot of things that are going to happen. This is going to be a challenging year for our nation, for our culture. So why don't you give your soul completely to God, expecting nothing in return, and yet watching God give you everything you've ever imagined that you want? How about if we chase the God who actually invented happiness, and then wait and see the wonders of a road through the wilderness, a river in the desert, the gifts that God has for you and for me in 2025. We've got a lot of things to talk about in the weeks ahead, but let's start with getting our spiritual houses in order so that we are the people that God can use to change the face of a nation moving forward. We will be salt and light, but we need to be fully aligned with the plans that God has for us, plans for our good, a hope and a future. Have a good 2025. Join me week by week. We'll analyze the culture, we'll stand on truth, and we'll be happy together with our God. This is Truth Currents.